I'd like to
Okay.
welcome all of you tonight to our second installment of Living with AI. Tonight we have the pleasure of Professor Nick LeJeune. Professor LeJeune received his Bachelor of Art with concentrations in graphic design and drawing from the McNeese State University in Lake Charles, Louisiana in 2006. He went on to receive a Master's of Fine Art in Art and Design with a concentration in Intermedia from West Virginia University in 2011. Between 2010 and 2018, he consulted, started, and served as an instructor and developer of the Studio Art cross-media track in the School of Fine Arts at Fairmount State University in Fairmount, West Virginia. In 2019, Nick's interactive installation work was presented in a solo exhibition at Ground Level Platform in Chicago, Illinois. In 2021, his installation work was accepted into the virtual New York City Electroacoustic Music Festival, as well as into the Concept 2021 exhibition featured at the Zong Institute of Contemporary Art in Gimpo, South Korea. In 2023, Nick's work was showcased in the Performing Media Festival hosted by Indiana University South Bend. Most recently, Nick's research was presented at the 19th International Conference on the Arts in Society hosted by the Hanyang University in Seoul, South Korea. He is currently serving as an associate professor of interactive media and game design at the College of Arts and Sciences at our own SUNY Polytechnic Institute in Utica, New York. I'd like to have a warm SUNY Poly welcome to Professor LeJeune. Thank you for joining us
Thank
today.
you, everyone. Thanks, Chris. Go ahead and share my screen, and I know I'm just going to do the entire screen. It makes it easier for everyone.
That's fantastic.
There it is. So everyone should be able to see my whole screen. I'm going to start off with some of my projects that I'm on currently, and then I'll get into the one that I'm working on very currently. So what I've done with the AIX this summer, I've been creating course curriculum. I'm going to go over the Raspberry Pis in a second, but I just want to make sure I get these two projects out. In the spring, in April, I ran a camp as part of the AIX that didn't focus on AI so much as focusing on 3D printing. We were able to use AI to come up with as an idea generation tool, not necessarily a generative tool. The idea was to teach somewhere between 8th and 12th graders how to use ChatGPT to jog their ideas. Students had trouble coming up with ideas, so I told them to generate anything in ChatGPT, narratives, characters, whatever they wanted, to give them a sense of descriptive terms they could then model. So the idea is you're having your idea in your brain, you put it into chat kind of perfects it for you, and then they model it. This will be,
Nick,
yeah.
can you zoom in
Yeah.
a little bit on your?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's do that.
There you go. Yeah, and then
Okay.
because that would tell me how old these kids were. So okay, so you were talking to kids using AI. So little kids, high school kids living with AI. Cool.
Yeah. So that's the first project. The second part of this, that was the first run. The class was successful. The next run's going to be with EOP students coming in mid-August. I've been communicating with Danelius King to get that class set up, so I'm going to try it again. Except these students are coming into SUNY Poly, and they're going to get a foundational course in not only 3D modeling, but using AI in that regard. Get an idea on how they can tool with that. This will also go into something in a project that's supposed starting in the fall, where Woolley, the president, wants us to bring in groups of students, 8th grade, progressively throughout their public their 8th through 12th grade schooling. So we'll bring them in the spring, in the fall, in the spring, until they graduate from high school. Anyway, that's in the works. It's still in brainstorming phase. So the second project I've got is developing course materials during the spring semester. I had developed my asset production 319, COM 319. I think I mentioned this in the last talk, but what I was doing was creating, using a sort of recursive way to create instructional design. So basically, what I would do is I take my materials from spring 2024 that all those materials did was teach Blender. Okay, because I did a whole run of the class just teaching Blender. And so what I did in spring 2025, I incorporated ChatGPT into the mix, added my old course materials, and from the syllabi and the schedule in that syllabi, I revised that schedule to have Maya instead of Blender. Maya is more commercially viable, and it's what companies are expecting of the IMGD students when they finish. That was successful. It developed a schedule. It developed an agenda for each day off that schedule, and for that agenda, I was able to create sheets. Now, what I've done this summer with IDT 553 and IDT 590, I've done pretty much the same thing, except it's not 300 level, it's 500 level. So the students are designing and using tools and sharing what tools they have been using and what they are doing with their projects, how they're referencing things, the ethical implications of what they're doing, so on and so forth. And I've had a really good round of projects, things I wouldn't even think of with AI. Anyway, that's where I'm at with that. That's still in effect right now. Courses will end at the end of July, so I'll have a little bit more formal analysis at the end of that. Now, this mostly current project that I'm most excited about, I've been working with Asela. We've been working together, trying to see both sides of this coin. I've been dealing primarily with the hardware side, and Asela's been working with the software side and the models themselves. So what I came up with about the end of May was this off-grid local language model system that's completely off-grid. And by off-grid, I mean no internet, but also no power. And so my wife made a camping appointment 5 nights in the wild up in the Adirondacks on a primitive site. So I figured, why don't I try this local language system while I'm there? Now, to get more into this, this is probably going to be the system that I bring to the campsite. But for now, what I've been working with is just the stuff that I have. Old phones lying around, Raspberry Pis, 4s from my show, to see what I can get this thing to work on. So now I'll move into the PowerPoint to kind of go over. I went over this a little bit earlier. Starting at the beginning of this month, I went through 3 experiments. Okay, the first one, I'm going to go ahead and start the slideshow from the beginning. The first experiment was just to install it on one of my Intel NUCs. I have a couple of NUCs. This is my strongest one. I would say the highest performance NUC that I have. If you're not familiar with NUCs, they're tiny mini computers. The older models are super small, but the newer models of NUCs, they have laptop parts in them. So if you think about a desktop with laptop parts. So what I wanted to do, I had Ubuntu Studio freshly installed on this system, and I wanted to just straight up install an open web UI on this system. And I was able to do that. I asked ChatGPT for a list of instructions and command line commands in order to do this. I had this document open somewhere. I'm going to segue here for just a second. We'll get down to the Raspberry Pi. I think those are the ones that the specific instructions are for. So I got it to run. I installed a binary, and I was able to, it didn't run super fast. The responses probably had a latency of like 15 seconds. And then it was like word for word. So it was real interesting to watch, but I bet I could have probably tweaked it with a smaller model, but I wanted to go the full Olama to see if I could get that to run. And there's a diagram of what I was attempting to do. I got it installed on the NUC. I can use it locally on that desktop environment. The second part of the experiment was to test it on a Raspberry Pi 4. So what this means is I wanted to install OpenWebUI and Olama on a Raspberry Pi that was significantly slower and had very much fewer resources. Okay, and so Acela provided me a lot of smaller modules, a couple smaller models that I could attempt to install. Ultimately, this device, along with others that I'm not mentioning here, I had phones dating back to 2012, all Android, and most of them I've rooted and I've put on their own like stripped clean. If you're familiar with phones, you know about bloatware. I'm not really sure this is a thing anymore, but you install when you get a phone at the store, it's loaded up with bloatware. What I've done is I've taken all these old phones, these Androids, and rooted them and put on Linux distros. Mostly it's Lineage. And so from those, what I tend to do on these old phones is install these models, the Olama, to those phones, and it just didn't work. It didn't work on this Raspberry Pi 4. They just can't handle it. And so it became clear at the end of this experiment what I needed to do was create a server that ran Olama. So I took another computer that I had lying around, which is a Mac Mini from an earlier show. I've had it quite some time. I completely gutted it. I upgraded the RAM in it, and I upgraded the hard drive in it to 500 gigabytes, and then I installed what's called a server, a LAMP stack rather. So that's Linux, Apache, MySQL, which is database software, and PHP. So if you're not immediately familiar with what all this means, think of it like Wix. You have Wix and you have Weebly where you can go make your own website. A LAMP server built on a computer that you have at home that's on an Ubuntu distro is completely open source and it's free. And basically, what I have to do, I did some tweaks in my firewalls to allow this to host a website. The website up, the test pages worked. Acela confirmed that for me. So then I installed OpenWeb UI on this server and made it so that my LAMP stack install didn't point to my web documents as it normally should, but had it point to the server. So successfully in the meeting earlier today, several people created user accounts on that OpenWeb UI installation. Now, where I'm at, you can see that we not only had access, I had access, the people in Hilltop had access to my server. And then the phones, you can access it via a web browser. So the phones are working on mobile data. This gives the possible outcome to where if you have devices, say phones and such, in a remote area, you can connect via the internet to your lab. You can put special keys on them, a file on the phone and a file on the server that pairs those two devices so no one else can get through. And that's the idea. This is kind of like learning to crawl before
You
we
need
walk.
the
Go ahead.
internet?
What's that?
Why do you need the internet?
Well, we're learning to crawl before we walk. I'm getting it to work via the internet on the server. And now what I've done and what I'm in the process of doing today is stripping it all down to local networks, removing the internet entirely. The next after that will be installing a solar powered charge battery system.
Right. Okay.
Steve, did you have a question?
No, I jumped ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. No, but like what I'm working on now is connecting this Raspberry Pi 4 as an external system to connect locally. So basically, the Raspberry Pi 4 is on my Wi-Fi, and my server containing the open Wi-Fi, it's no longer accessible from the internet, meaning none of you can log into it. I cut all that out. And so now what I've done is I'm setting up my own personalized network here and pairing that Raspberry Pi to the server so that they can communicate and I can use the Raspberry Pi to access the server. The idea here is you go into a space, a campsite, whatever, it's primitive. You don't have any power, but you do have a system that's solar powered. It charges the packs, and the battery packs run the system. That's the idea.
So,
Down the
Professor
road,
Lejeune, am I
yeah,
understanding that you're going to be in some way you have like almost like a VPN tunnel going back to a local system that you have set up somewhere
Yeah,
remote?
you set up keys. And what I'm starting to learn with the Raspberry Pis is I'm not gonna the Raspberry Pi installs don't have any graphic user interface. They don't have any desktop, no X server. And if you're not familiar with that, it's like we no Windows for 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 example, like it's all terminal command line. So what I'm trying to do is program the Raspberry Pi to act as the prompt. So what I mean is you turn on that Raspberry Pi and it boots into a prompt, and generally you gave a login and a password. But as soon as I type in that login and password, it goes right to the command line, ready for my commands. Instead, I'm going to configure it to boot up, log in, maybe not even log in, boot up, and go right to the prompt where you start asking AI questions. And that will be paired with the server through like a 250 ASCII character pin. So that's the idea. That's where I'm headed, and I'm trying to get it to work. I've been working on it all day. I haven't connected them yet, but we're going to get them connected. It's really it's a matter of getting the addresses correctly and getting them all lined up in the internal network. That's what I got.
That's pretty
That's where I'm
cool.
at.
I get it. So what I liked when Professor Steve had mentioned this, and he said he didn't mention your name. He just said that somebody was going to be doing a project of this nature, and I was like, "Wow, this kind of sounds like Professor Lejeune's going full MacGyver, and
So
he's
you
going to
guessed
be."
it.
I did, and I really think this is interesting because this is a really a nice as a microcosm. I guess when you think about trying to proliferate technology into remote locations
Yeah.
you could actually, use this as kind of like a microcosm to show how you might be able to distribute. Um,
Now, yeah, exactly. And the idea, Acela opened up the idea that there's a myriad of possibilities for any one of these configurations. Where my like there's always an agenda behind somebody who's researching. Ironically, this just lines up with a lot of AIX goals and initiatives. But what I'm doing is I got into a show in Grand Rapids in September, and what I told myself I'm going to do this summer. This is what I do. But when I get into a show, I always want to do something different. So whatever I applied with is probably not going to be there. It's going to be something new and improved. I always improve on my process. And this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all the wires from my process. So, what I mean by that is I'm going to have something called a latte panda. You may not be familiar with it. Let's go back to this over here. So, a latte panda, we can get a nice look at it. This is like a Raspberry Pi on steroids. I mean, that's pretty much what I want to do. And get this. Let's take a look at this device. And so, it's a larger one, and it can process a lot more. Um, it has a lot more processing power that allows it to run, flawlessly the Olama package, Open Web UI. So what I'm going to do is this will be the device that I bring out into the sticks to use. Now this is obviously going to be powered. I have a display at home that allows me to. It's a touch screen and it can be charged from a battery pack. And the Raspberry Pi or the Latte Panda can be charged from that same battery pack. So what I'm going to essentially use the primary power station, I'll use that to charge the battery packs. So there's no direct correlation between the charging station and the app, and the model that's running all the model. So the idea is that all I have to do is keep track of the battery packs, plug in that solar panel, and charge them up. And then every few hours, the idea the system is built off only using it for an hour or two at a time, and then putting the battery packs back on the charger. That's that's the details behind this specific part.
The what's the upsell, if you will, to go from 16 gigabytes of RAM to 32 or 64? And would that consume a lot more power and consume your batteries much faster?
Probably yes. This alone will consume a lot more power than the Raspberry Pi 4,
Hmm.
but it's the upscale is like another hundred. I would say another $50 or so, and then you could do a 5 GB SSD. Where that comes into play just depends on like the binaries I've used haven't been very big. They've been like 3.5 to 4 gigs. I mean,
Hmm.
that's big in terms of a binary, but the idea is I don't know if disk space is all that important, but RAM certainly is.
Yeah, no, the RAM, that's what I was after, right? Because that's the
Yeah.
size of the model that you can run. So in a 16 gig RAM, how big of a model can you run?
That would be a question for Acela.
Can I
I
jump
don't
in?
know. Yeah, you absolutely can because I. This is why we work together well because a lot of the back end for this for the actual Open Web UI I'm not too familiar with.
Mhm.
So yes, you can for 16 GB. You have to give some room for the OS to run, but I think you can run a large language model, at least like 2 billion quantize. We can easily do that.
Cool.
And the power
And then
consumption
Now,
is not that bad?
what generates the power? What consumes the power? Is it inference? Is it existence? Is it just running? You know what I mean? Is it like the more you use it, or is it going to be an hour whether you prompt it or not?
the hour is my limitation to like to be nice to the batteries is all.
Yeah, but
So
what uses power?
When it's
processing power.
inference, I believe, yeah. When
Yeah.
when people start to interact with the AI, then AI need to communicate, and then like all the machines gonna have to run it in their optimal way. So that's where I think the most power consumption gonna happen.
But I guess is it in the
Well, it's going to be cooling, right? Obviously, as the more
Yep.
usage on the chipset is going to put more
Mhm.
strain on the system, correct?
That's
mhm.
correct.
Yes.
But is it
Now,
like a more complicated prompt that runs for longer to answer, generates, uses more, you know what I mean? Like, or is it a simple prompt like that uses less power? Is it the number of tokens that you send and receive, or is it the amount of time it takes to generate those tokens? And I guess I don't. That's that. I've never thought about AI models that way before because it's not been relevant. But when it is here,
Yes, that is what I'm working on, Steve, on my side, because I just
mm,
want to strip out all the not relevant pieces because I just want to have the optimal RAG, optimal way to run a large language model, the best way to fit in this model that Nick built.
mhm.
Yes.
and that works along my lines because I like reusing old things. So I've mentioned this before at the last talk. Well, what I do when I go to a gallery, have the gallery locally source all technology that people are throwing out. They give them a space to donate them. And so what I'll do is I'll show up, I'll configure all of those devices to run my stuff. And so that's why I've used these old phones and used things I have lying around the house to see if I can get them to work. So stripping this process down, as Acela put it, works in line with that. Allows me to get smaller and smaller language models to work on these older and older materials.
So so you're interested in size of language models for different, yeah, like you said in the very beginning, all sorts of reasons for people to do things, right?
Yep.
Um, yeah, that's very cool.
But
The
I
I guess the reason I was asking about the power because um, it's pretty cool to be off grid, but power is actually it's the internet grid. I think that's the challenging bit in a lot of I guess it's both.
Okay, so how you think without the internet it's a challenge?
Well, if you're like we're thinking of doing community AI and we want to deploy AI deep into different communities all over the world, and are they
That's the
most
one that was successful today.
are they most likely to have power or are they most likely to have internet? Um, my
That's the
guess
big
is that
question.
it's power.
Yeah.
see,
Power generally comes first.
Professor Steve, I have to tell you, for me, what I find most amazing is the sustainability part. The fact that he's
Hmm.
reusing the technology because we a lot of first world nations, as well as second world, waste a lot of
Yeah.
technology. And the fact that you can take older pieces of technology and utilize it and kind of give it a second life to do these things, that's the part for me I find amazing. And thinking about AI and reusing a lot of the existing infrastructure, because we're just, when you think about the amounts of e-waste that we generate every year,
Hmm.
we've got to be
Hmm.
smarter about
It's an endless cache of material
exactly,
in
exactly.
mind. It always has been.
But I don't think people are conceptualizing the marrying of modern AI approach to a more sustainable model. So that's what I like about that. When I heard this initially, when you expressed it, I thought, oh, that's kind of cool that you're not necessarily getting the latest phones or whatever, that you're trying to reuse existing sustainable pieces, locally sourced pieces to make this work. That's very, very industrious.
Yep, and this is the beginning, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is the prototype, and then when the time comes, we don't need data centers because we can, like, so many computers out there, we can just stack them and we can use it.
I don't know. That's um, the data centers. We may not need data centers for inference, but we probably need data centers for training,
Oh, it's a different thing. Yes, yes. But
right?
training needs data as well. So this way we can gather all the data, like from top to bottom, everybody's. Yes.
And yeah, and the Latte Panda and the Raspberry Pis provide a unique opportunity because I have a handheld rechargeable paper scanner. It'll scan photos, it'll scan it into this thing. We have phones that use the web to connect to devices too. We've got that set up. So basically, if I'm out in the field and I don't have power or internet, I can take a picture of something, a plant, an animal, and feed it into my AI, and it'll tell me what it is. It'll tell me how I could use it. That's that's theoretical in nature, but the idea is it's there. I mean, that's
Yeah,
essentially where that's the model I'm building off of. Just that's
yeah, that's
it would
all
be
doing inference. That's not training. So
no, I
what
understand training needs the
the
data
fellow
centers
was
for
saying
sure.
about not needing data centers, we still need them for training, and that's like, I think, I don't, I mean, unless
You're
uh,
right because
Ron
it does all
Schultz
the simulations.
about distributed modules for training, and that's a whole different category of work. I don't
Right.
think that's what this is.
No.
But yeah, but this is, I like the idea of without the internet of community-based AI, and people logging into your machine as a classroom, right?
I
You
mean,
can create really a local environment for your classroom.
by default, it logs prompts from its
Yeah,
users. So you get a history. It builds a history. That's one thing that I've been using ChatGPT for, just for the simple fact that it logs my questions. And then I
yeah.
can look over the course of an entire 30 days. I'm like, man, I asked that question way too much. Like, and then I get an idea. I get an idea of the flow of my thought process. You make it a community. I mean, that's community thought right there. And it's
Yes.
all logged.
It can be logged. I think that's an option within Open Web UI. And we had an interesting demo. We had a pizza AI event here tonight at 6. We had about, I don't know, 15 people probably who live in the building who came for pizza and conversations about AI. And we demoed Open Web UI. And one of the attendees happens to be an intern in our IT department, and lives in the building. And it took him about 15 seconds or maybe a minute or two sitting at my computer, looked up my IP address, and then on his computer, he had logged into mine, created an account on Open Web UI, and was able to see my knowledge base that I had stored.
Yeah, it doesn't take long.
So, from his perspective, from our IT department's perspective, turning students, letting them have Open Web UI, creates massive security vulnerability.
Always. Sure.
So
But
the
that's not,
solution,
yeah,
what
but the
the,
solution.
the solution is to add some layers of security to Open Web UI and put them in some repository that students download and turns Open Web UI into AIX Workbench, which is a secure version of Open Web UI for use on SUNY Poly's campus.
Gotcha.
So that's very cool today. But it was after you shared your IP address, I said, "Oh my God, that's a problem."
Yeah,
Okay.
That's a
it's
Okay.
fun. Why not? I mean,
yeah. No,
I've totally changed it by now. I mean, it was like 5 minutes after I shut it off.
oh, of
But
course, because you understand that, but I don't, and I'm
I know
dangerous.
that, yes, a layman will not. I'm not saying you're a layman, Steve, but
Oh, I am. Believe
they're
me,
not going to know that.
I would just share it out. It's like, oh my God, and he just wiped my hard drive. Not
I'd
really,
like to
but
see him try.
he said he couldn't. But I don't believe him. But anyway, Nick, that
But
was great.
yeah, good.
Yeah.
That's
So I have a
So
question for you, Professor Lejeune. Do
yeah.
as you're starting to really dig in and you're finding ways to do, responsible, sustainable AI, um, have you ever thought about this question and taken it to heart? How much AI is too much AI in a daily routine?
Hmm.
Is there such a thing?
No, I mean, if you're having them generating material
Mm-hmm.
and sending that material, like basically what I do is a lot of the times I'm using it to help me, not be so emotional in emails.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's definitely one thing I've been using it for. Another thing I've been using it for is I'm not a mechanic, but I am with AI.
Mm-hmm.
I have neighbors that have like I always go to my neighbors who know that stuff, who know mechanics. I'll be like, "Hey, this thing told me so and so. Is this true?" Moreover than that, I fixed my entire lawnmower this summer just by sitting there and plugging it. Like, this is the model. These are the parts I need to order. I ordered the parts, and it told me like step by step by step. And the beauty part about that is just like with the computers, there's an instant verification of if it works or not. I mean, I wasn't doing anything life threatening. I was adjusting the deck and oiling up and doing all kinds of maintenance things on my materials before I put them out to use. But I mean, I wouldn't put in what I want to say to somebody in email and have it write me something and then send that without
Mm-hmm.
heaps of editing. And I'm still doing so. You asked that question: how much is too much AI? I think when you're having it replace your critical thought, that's much.
Okay. That's interesting because I think, when you think about a lot of the youth now, people could argue that, the convenience might be making some of them complacent. And I'm not
I
necessarily saying that, obviously, for
no,
educators and people who are thinking about it, you're thinking about ways to collaborate with it and use it thoughtfully and responsibly. But
yeah,
some of the youth are not necessarily thinking
no,
along those lines.
no, and that's where we need to start early. That's where we
Right.
need to start early, and that's why I'm doing the 8th through 12th grade initiatives.
Right.
And we don't need because I have students that turn in AI work that has not been edited. I
So
mean,
you can tell, you can see it.
I've
Like,
been on it so much now that and this is another reason why I joined the AIX was I want to get into this and use it and use it and use it and use it and use it. So that makes me more efficient grader in the long run.
hmm
So, I mean, that's just how, I mean, I haven't gotten really into the Meshy.ai or 3D modeling generations, but they're there. I mean, basically, I think I said this last time, but like my Com 319 class acid production, that you don't need to learn that. It's good for fundamentals. And if you're on the job, you're still going to be using old systems. You're still going to be using systems that require you to know how to make a mesh from scratch.
hmm
And because you first time you do an auto rig in a 3D model, you're going to have to edit it. I mean, it's not going to be fantastic
Yeah.
because
how
that's an
about
algorithm designed to put a rig, or for those of you who don't know, it's a skeleton inside a model that you have created. So the possibilities of that auto rig working on a model that somebody has created, it's just there's a myriad of possibilities. They're not going to be able to do it right out the bolt. That's always been my belief about AI. You got to collaborate with it and you got to make it something. You just can't take it. I mean, there's definitely hallucinations all over the place. I I've used it to watch TV shows. I'll watch a TV show and I'll be like, man, this show is making me dumb. and I don't understand what's going on. And so I'll have a conversation with AI about it. And I'll be like, yeah, and they'll tell me all the actors' bios and their character development and what's tying together. Oh, I found errors in it. I watched a show this summer twice, an entire show. And I wanted to see how accurate its analysis was on the first go around, and it made it all over the place. It got characters confused. It had like created some characters in some regards. So I've been using it a lot. I've been using it for that. I've been just using it. Um, I guess using it too much would be like, give me a summary of every single episode in the show without watching the show. That's too
Mm,
much.
okay.
Or
Interesting.
give me a 3 paragraph summary of Mice and Men. You're just not gonna get the same thing you got in English in high school. You know what I mean? Like you're just not gonna get it. So it is tough with the younger generations. They don't have that basis of critical analysis that they learned somewhat in middle school and definitely in high school and definitely in college. They lose that. They don't have that basis when they come to us. And so it really is just a re-education on a lot of students. That's
But
just the fact.
I think you've your approach of
Yeah,
hitting the students young, like if you're really trying to get them to be responsible and use it responsibly and understand it young, it's going to serve them better in the long run because they're going to
it's going to serve
understand.
all of us better.
Yeah, that's right.
I
But
don't
they're
think
gonna.
we
It's
have.
just
I don't think we have the luxury of focusing on the young at the moment. I think the moment requires us to focus on everyone because everyone's pretty much in the same ballpark. Um, and that's, I can't even begin to think about how you approach AI with a new reader. Um,
Mm,
that's a whole different category of thinking. Um,
yeah.
Nick, I was wondering if you could spend like a minute because I have to leave at 8:15.
Okay.
Could you spend a minute talking about your experience with the open web UI so far and whether you think it's productive for us to continue to pursue potentially introducing it to students as a tool that we would introduce them to during their first year seminar, during their
Now,
first semester of college.
so my actual experience with Open Web UI has been minimal,
Hmm.
tragically. I've been focused more because this is just how Nick works. Like I've been focused more on getting the thing to work.
We've gone off the reservation.
Yep.
Okay.
So I got it to work. And I've asked it a few questions and a few questions that I answered right. But I haven't really had the breadth and the scope that I've had with ChatGPT.
Yeah, but it's not that so much because that's dependent on other things such as which model you're using, but just the idea of having a tool like this that you can mess with parameters. I'm trying to figure out if it's worth the overhead.
you know,
So,
prof, Professor Steve, just from my limited exposure to it, I potentially see some value, like even in the understanding. I mean, I get where you're going with the overhead, but just the understanding. I think that a lot of people are not necessarily making the connection of how, they're just using like ChatGPT or they're using, Bard or Google or what have you. They're not really trying to understand how things work together. And I
mhm.
think that's maybe where the most value initially is coming because they're proactively getting in there and configuring so that they can have something that's running in local and it kind of makes sense because they're seeing it and they're putting it together.
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious because we're still poking around on this thing, and
So
yeah.
yeah, I know you got to go, Steve, but this. I'm running this locally in my computer.
Hmm.
This is connecting to my in-house LAMP server that's pointed towards the open web. So or open web UI. So now I can work on it within my own network. The firewalls I've configured have only allowed access for SSH between anyone on my subnet. That's it. So it can't be accessed from the outside.
I kind of okay. Yeah, I think it's good. Okay. Hey, thanks,
Yeah, no problem,
Chris.
Steve.
Okay, I will catch you guys later. You guys can stick as long as you'd like, of course.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor. Have a wonderful evening.
Yeah.
So again, Professor Lejeune, I appreciate, what you
Mhm.
showed us because I think there's a lot of value. And even look, I was amazed, and I'm just gonna switch a little bit here when we talk about some of the geopolitical unrest and conflict that's going on. I
Mhm.
was amazed when I was listening to how Ukraine, as an example, did what they did using like consumer type of items, right? And so
Yeah,
this idea of reusing technology to achieve a goal. And so I'm
yeah.
impressed when I hear how you're reusing existing technology and you're trying to do something. You're not even doing something easy where you're saying, "Oh, I'm staying in on the grid and I'm staying,
No,
in a
that's not
city."
fun.
I'm going That's not fun. You're
That's
making
not.
it, you're taking it to the next level. You're going out in the wilderness. And so you're trying to make something sustainable, but then also, you're thinking about ruggedizing and also how am I going to recharge it and all of these other variables that then bring a really interesting component of
So
the remote nature.
that okay. So a lot of the ideas in my brain they revolve around my house, but there's some that like we were working with defense contractors last year that like just the AIX was and some other groups just on possible ideas and applications of the things that they were creating. Um, I was a soldier, as you probably know. I was in the army for like 5 years, regular army, and I was a lot of time in the field. And we were in the field in 2001 to 2004, Korea. And what happened a lot of the time in Korea, you're stationed there as a soldier, and if you're a telecom guy, we were commo. We we were the guys that hooked up with the MPs and the medics first because we knew that we could always fix their computers. So that would always be some kind of give and take, right? That's a side story. But regardless, we were always given hand me downs from somewhere in the barracks. And unlike the infantry guys or the artillery guys, right, who did God knows what base, us telecom guys were all in the barracks playing Quake or playing Halo. I mean, we were always looking for old computers. People were always leaving base and ditching computers. So we were always kind of slocking things together. But this goes back further than that. It goes back to my childhood. My dad was the VP of IT at several companies around the Washington, D.C. area. And as a kid, I was the baby by like 6 years. So I spent a lot of time on my own at the house. And a lot of the time, dad would come home with something and he'd throw a piece of equipment, like a piece of a computer part at me. And one time I just asked him if I wanted, if can I build it? Can I get a computer? So what he did was he went to his job and got a whole lot of hand-me-downs, and they ended up being my toys. And that's that just here figure it out. My dad was not a cruel person, but that felt cruel at the
No,
time.
no,
But
I'll tell you though, Professor, first of all, thank you for your service. Let me lead
yeah,
with
thanks.
that.
No problem.
And second, I can definitely relate to you with this because in another life, when I used to consult in private sector, one day I was down in the city, and I was down in the West Village, and I came into the office of this loft I was working in, and they had just one of the design studios had just thrown out all of these. And you may remember there was a period of time when Apple had opened their licensing and there were all these Macs that were not Macs. They were like built with Windows type uh, equipment, but they were
Yeah,
running like the Mac OS. And so I saw these on the street and I was like, oh my goodness. And I started to bring them up to the office, of course, checking them first because, you're taking them out of a dumpster. So you're not bringing any infestations or stuff in. But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
one of my colleagues there, he immediately, big, Napster at the time, MP3s, he starts playing the theme from Sanford and Son as I'm bringing these,
Exactly.
computers into the office, and we were just laughing. But what I did with them, I was like, well, wait a second. I'm overseeing this office. We've got hold music, and I'm loading up the machines, and I'm putting hold music on them, and I'm running like a server, like a music server that's just recycling. I mean, it's doing, not even a third of what the computer can do. But I'm like, well, I've got these old machines and they can do like these little it's like almost pre-automation type tasks. And
Yeah.
so I like the idea of that. I mean, we are just creating, as I said, so many tons of e-waste. And if we can use this and be responsible in a lot of ways, and then even benefit in a remote scenario, I mean, that's a win-win to
So,
me.
so another thing that I do like regularly at my house is I find like I joined this family that I'm in now by via my wife, and they're old dairy farmers. So like I am the guy. Like, here, Nick, I got this computer. Can you figure out what's wrong with it? In 15 minutes, hours, it's up. But look at this. Do a hardware firewall. Right? You go on Amazon and you see you got these really weaker ones, but then you got the really high end ones. I think they go up as much as $700, right? And if you're not familiar with a firewall, it blocks traffic you don't want,
Absolutely.
right? And so what you can do is you take a Raspberry Pi, or you can take a Raspberry Pi, or you can take one of these old computers that nobody wants, right? And it's good to have a miniature one rather than a full desktop, for power consumption. But basically, can like Linux has distros that are specifically for firewalling, and that's just like back in 2004 when my dad gave me a Fedora disk. Like, if you're not familiar, Fedora is the old one of the it's still around. It's a Linux distro, and I just suddenly realized like there's a lot of things you can do in Linux that eliminate a lot of your technological needs if you have the old computers and you have the old tech. Like, when somebody looks at me and they're like, "My phone's dead. I'm going to go trade it in." I'm like, "Well, how much are you going to get for it?" And they'll tell me, like, they come back and tell me it's like $30. I'm like, "No, I'll give you $30." Like, and then suddenly I have a phone. Now I definitely run into some. I've never worked with iPhones. I don't touch Mac anymore.
Mm,
Like, 2012, 2013, the Macintosh has started to get slimmer
yes,
and really
yes,
specific and proprietary to their own techs.
that's correct.
So I didn't. I tried it once, never again. But but no, like all these other, like the Androids for sure. There's only been a few that I haven't cracked, and it has to do with it's more of an ISP thing. So Verizon likes to lock down their phones pretty good. The interesting part is that it's a device. It's a Samsung device, but because it's on the Verizon network, or was, you have to take the what's called the IEDM, or what the numbers on the back of phones are underneath the battery back in the day.
Right.
You would put that into Verizon's website, and they would tell you yay or nay, you can root it. It's really bizarre. This is something that happened a few weeks ago when I was trying to root one of the phones that I had. Oh, it was a Motorola. The Motorola wouldn't do it. So it was Motorola on a Verizon network, and the Verizon wouldn't let me install my own custom ROMs on it. So there's hem ups in there, but a lot of the Androids you just straight up um, the old Samsung tablets that don't ever update anymore. There
That's
was a
right.
point in like one tablets that first came out in 2013, on or around 2019 or 2020, they all got cut off. They were just cut off from updates, and nothing would run. And my father-in-law came to me, he's like, "Can you get this to run?" Like, this is a dairy farmer who was using it to buy and sell tractor parts. Um, so I took it home and I put Lineage on it. I cracked the bootloader and I cracked the recovery system, and I put Linux stuff on it, and boom, it's a media player. I can set it up. Basically, I can put all my home movies on it. I
Right.
can have it.
Right.
It doesn't have a SIM, so it's not on the web. I can disable the web right from the recovery boot. I say absolutely no web traffic whatsoever. You put some tape on the cameras and you're set. I
That's
mean,
right.
it's a TV. It's a glorified chargeable TV that you put anywhere. So it's just my it's what I do.
Well, no, I appreciate, but I see in your examples, you're melding the modern of AI, but you're also, again, you're
Yeah.
using more of the legacy equipment, and I think you're making a statement also, even if you don't realize it, that it isn't just about throwing the baby in the bathwater out. It's actually, no, we can make this more sustainable. I mean, yes, I get all of the amazing things they're going to do with data center, but we have realistic concerns. We are on a planet that has limited resources, we have limited space, and we have to try to reuse as much of the technology that we can. It's just the responsible thing to do.
Crazy, right? It is. And a lot of those layers are there in the work. They always have been. I've always found it fascinating to see discarded material and then like, hey, do I need that for something? Yes. I may know what it is right now. That makes me an absolutely horrible hoarder. But the last 10 years, I've last 20 years really, I've really started to like I have a whole other side of my life. I don't know if I want to show it here, but I'll show it here, whatever.
Well, I can just tell you, I can just tell you, I appreciate this because my wife wants to choke me sometimes because I will hold on to like SCSI cables and some of the old because I'm a Mac guy, so I hold on to some of the old Mac connectors. But I will
Yeah,
tell you, they come in very handy. I can't tell you how many times I've been in scenarios where I've had colleagues come to me and they're like, "Hey, Chris, I know you know Macs. How do I get this off? What can I do?" Like, oh, I've got a connector, and we can work it. We can
exactly.
like bring it over and get this done. And yeah, I do think that you can't just abandon just snap your fingers
No,
and just move to the forward thinking new technology.
no, and like I got here, like a lot of these old parts, like I mean, I just put them out. Like I've done using FireWire as long since dead, since USB 3
Uh-huh.
completely replaced it. I've just got these parts, and it's interesting, just like baseball cards, or just like these dolls that I have. I have like all these Sesame Street things.
Well, wait a second.
Like,
I saw something from my childhood there. You had the Ernie puppet. Yeah, right,
yeah,
right at the top.
yeah. No, I
I
mean, there's a lot of stuff here. There's like
yeah.
Jetfire, and there's just a lot of stuff, and
Oh.
it's just stuff because I moved my parents from. We're getting way off track, but I moved my parents from Southwest Louisiana to Houston. And in the process, they looked at me, they're like, Nick, just take most of it and just see what you can get. So a lot of this is funneling back to mom and dad. But it's interesting with a lot of the parts that I found. I got a lot of Ethernet cables. I got a modem here somewhere. I think yes. So this is like a straight up 556K modem that I
Oh,
think
three
has
com. I remember this.
you would
Yes,
be
yes,
you would be
yes,
amazed
yes.
on how many people buy this stuff.
Yeah,
So I
that's
mean it
actually
needs some
really funny.
TLC,
Oh yeah, but see
but
that's interesting that you see because I'll tell you, and I do appreciate. Yeah, I see you have Jetfire's engine there, and I
yeah, yeah, yeah.
appreciate all of this stuff. But what's interesting is I know that sometimes, we're living like we happen to live in New York, right? And it doesn't matter, downstate, upstate,
Yeah.
and so forth. But when you leave New York and you go to other parts of the country, you don't realize how much more difficult it is to obtain certain things. There's certain
You
things
got
that may
it.
be in abundance, but there's some fine minutia that is more challenging to obtain.
Yeah, especially in Louisiana. I lived there for 3 years,
Okay.
and I lived after I finished the army, I lived in Louisiana where my parents lived to go to school, and my dad grew up there, so I mean he was a native, but
Mm.
like up there. But I didn't. I grew up in Northern Virginia, so it was just a little different for me. But that's what I would do. Like the town that they lived in was really a glorified retirement home. It was a
Mm.
small town called Welsh in Louisiana. And a lot of those people, man, they would use things and they would just throw it out. So I built an entire recording studio, primitive, but I built it off of what? Fedora
Mm.
and any computer I could find. So I had that up in my studio. I was recording tracks all day long, and I've just been hooked on it ever since.
Can I ask you this question? How do you think
Yeah,
people in Louisiana now with this proliferation when they see all of the self-driving cars and they see Tesla and they see all of this artificial intelligence, the some of the fake news that we see, the things that are being created, how do you think do you think that they look at AI proliferation as something positive or is it something like questionable,
I
something to be
couldn't tell you. The only thing I know about Louisiana is, or just the South in general, is people are
Hmm.
friendlier, and
Yes.
they really focus more on family. They focus more on gathering and talking. So I would suspect the incorporation of AI into their lives to be quite slow.
Hmm.
I could be completely wrong with that. They don't have very good records on education.
Right.
Just don't. So I don't know what that's going to mean for the future, but you get to the cities like Lafayette and Lake Charles and Shreveport, New Orleans. You get to these in Baton Rouge. They definitely have wonderful things like we do in New York, but a lot of that stays on in swamp.
Right. Right.
And you get out to the like they. I went on a camp. I went on a hunting trip that I'm not a hunter, but I went on a hunting trip out in the camps down there are a little bit different. They're
Hmm.
out on actual floton. They call them floton. They're actually out on like a floating piece in a swamp, and it's like you get in the boat and there's like a whole bunch of little alligators somewhere. I
Wow.
mean,
Wow.
that's the sticks, and there's no internet. There's absolutely none.
Well, that's why
So,
your
like I said,
scenario, your use case,
you got it.
it potentially is very viable in a lot more of areas. I mean, I hate to say it, but a lot more when you think about our country and the expansiveness, you're going to have a lot more of the rural than you are going to have the urban.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, especially not Louisiana so much, but like Wyoming for sure, and Montana.
Right.
Well,
Right.
there's just, and that's the thing. Like, so we have this initiative in the United States to get I think Barack Obama started it, but to get broadband internet to rural places.
Yes. Yes.
God, I
That's
have
right.
no idea what the status of it now. It can't be good, but I think great on fiber internet, getting it everywhere. But let's think about this. You got a lot of places in this country that people don't see very often that are just expanse. People don't believe it because of what they, because of we're all in cities. We're all gathered in these huge urban
That's right.
areas.
That's right.
But a lot of people don't see it. There's parts of Texas it takes you 2 days to go over.
That's
I
right.
mean, and it's I want to see them, and I've been looking up. I'm not going to buy it. God, no, I don't have that money. But there are lots, lots in New Mexico that are like 6,000 acres. I mean, I can't fathom that much land. It's a ranch. I just can't fathom it. So, like, what
Yeah.
would you do? You're like X amount of miles from your house. You're on horseback. You got this thing. And you're like, what is this? Like, what? Give me a solution. It's at least a step in the right direction. Yeah, you're gonna have experienced ranchers and experienced cowboys, but
But
you're not
the
gonna have internet.
Yeah, but the idea that you could possibly set something up that would add value and would allow for productivity to proliferate in a very remote location. I mean, I think that's very commendable, and I'm intrigued, and I'm going to. This is a good segue because obviously we're at
Yeah,
time,
I've
but
talked way over time.
I will say
But
this. I'll
yeah,
say this. This is a good something to leave on. I would love to see what your next iterations are going to be as we continue to see the evolution, because I think you're making very smart use of the technology. And thank you for coming on tonight, Professor LeJeune, to talk to
no
us
problem,
about
Chris.
living with AI. And I really do like this remote scenario application. It's pretty slick, and I look forward to seeing how it evolves in the future.
Same here.
And
Have a good one.
thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thanks
And
everyone.
please, everybody, stay safe and happy holidays. Everyone have a safe and happy Juneteenth.